The difference between a fearful avoidant or secure person taking a step back in a relationship is when you're fearful avoidant, you would see that it's like hurt, shut down, justification for why we're shutting down. What a secure person does is they'll go, hurt, is it solvable? Try to solve it. When you don't have that self-awareness, you think that you're communicating by picking a fight or arguing, but that literally has nothing to do with communication. Actual communication is like, I can frame what I do need instead of what I'm upset about, and we can come up with strategies for resolution, and I can check in with them too. That's communication.
Her name is Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
I hope I pronounce her name properly. Thais Gibson.
I am so excited for you to be here with me today. Thank you for joining us. Hello and welcome to another episode of our podcast. I'm here today with our amazing co-host, Mike DeZio, and today we are going to do a deep dive into 5 things that will often make fearful avoidants leave relationships all of a sudden or run for the hills. And a lot of these things that they build up over time, if the partner of a fearful avoidant or loved one doesn't realize that they're doing these things, it can actually cause a fearful avoidant to leave a relationship seemingly all of a sudden, because often they'll hold things in and not talk about how this is really affecting them. And then that may come out as a sabotaging or really strong deactivating strategy later on. So we're going to dive into these 5 things. If you didn't already know this, Mike and I used to both be avoidant attachment styles ourselves. I was fearful avoidant. Mike was dismissive avoidant. We both done the work to become secure. So we often share just a little bit more in detail about the inside of our lives, like what it actually felt like to be fearful avoidant or dismissive avoidant, and what it feels like to be on the other side of that, and the steps to getting there, and what that experience was like. So our hope is that this really can help you, can support you in your journey, and really resonate with you in terms of where you are, where you can get to, and also hopefully you feel less alone in this whole process, because you're able to see, hey, even though this may be a difficult struggle I'm going through right now, there's definitely an opportunity for transformation and for life in the area of relationships to get so much easier. So with that being said, let's kick it off. Mike, do you want to start by just sharing one of the first of 5 major things that can often cause a fearful avoidant to want to head for the hills?
Yeah, for sure. So as we know, we'll start off saying APs have the abandonment wound like the most. But for fearful avoidance, the thought or the threat of being abandoned by their partner can send them sort of early to leave a relationship. So I was wondering if you could sort of go more into detail. What would that look like? What would it be where a fearful avoidance, like, oh, no, I think my partner's getting ready to leave, or I'm noticing some things that it might look like that they're going to abandon me. And then an FA would want to sort of, do it before that other person did it to them, to sort of protect themselves and leave before the person leaves them. So what would that look like? I was wondering, like, what signs or what would they see where they're like, oh my gosh, I think this is happening. I need to get out of here like ASAP. If you want to go into detail about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, generally what you're going to see is interestingly enough, when you look at a fearful avoidant, even though they share that anxious side, obviously, as most people know who are listening, they have that anxious side in relationships, but also that strong avoidance side where they can shut down or stonewall or get triggered by things. And what's interesting is for fearful avoidance, the fear of abandonment, yes, can cause them to activate, or in other words, can cause them to feel like they need to maintain proximity and closeness and get closer to their partner. But it can also cause them to deactivate. Whereas what you're going to see is anxious attachment styles are almost constantly activating. So they're always trying to get closer and people please more and win the partner over. Whereas fearful avoidance, they can have activating strategies and moments where they're like, oh no, and they feel really anxious and they want to get closer to somebody, but they can also have really strong deactivating strategies where they feel like, whoa, you're going to hurt or leave me. I need to leave you first. I need to push away first. And so they will do that. So what you'll see is because fearful avoidants can activate or deactivate, they can actually be in the position, exactly to your point of what you said, where they feel anxious, but they're like, okay, I need to move away from you before you hurt me. And it can be a deep protective mechanism. And so some of those things that a fearful avoidant would often pick up on in that particular case are things like, the partner calling less or making less of an effort or texting less. And I think it's important to note that this will show up differently at different stages of relationships. So if you have somebody who's fearful avoidant and they're seeing somebody in the first 0 to 3 months, and that person stops making as much of an effort, you can almost guarantee a fearful avoidant is going to be like, yeah, out of here. Because they don't want to feel vulnerable to that person, and they don't have any established deep connection too much yet. 3 to 6 months, you're gonna see a likelihood of that too, where, like, if they see less of an effort, they're not even gonna try to talk about it. They're just gonna, make an effort probably initially, and if they don't feel like it's getting reciprocated and that effort's still tanking from the other person, they're not gonna go to the person and say, "Hey, what's going on? Are we good? Is there something, that is not being met in terms of a need from your end? What can we hash out?" Like, they won't be having those conversations. They'll just be going like, "Okay, I reached out a few times," or even, like, once or twice sometimes I reached out and made an effort. I'm not seeing
Mhm.
it back. I'm just gonna shut down more and more, and they can keep shutting down, shutting down, shutting down. So, you'll see that in a really big way around abandonment,
Mhm.
in those earlier stages. Much later on in a relationship, if there's truly been a deeper established connection. So this is, if you're seeing fearful avoidants who, like, live with somebody, if you're seeing fearful avoidants who have been with a partner for more than a couple of years and, they see them very regularly. In those cases, you'll generally see, yes, fearful avoidance can activate. And I think it's really important to highlight here for listeners. Activating versus deactivating, this is about your behaviors, okay? So you can activate emotionally and feel really afraid of abandonment and feel nervous, but, like, how are you then following up with your behaviors? And a lot of times you'll see more often than not deactivating around the abandonment wound. Of course, there are those exceptions. And specifically those exceptions are later on into the relationship. In a more serious relationship, if there's been a deep connection built, those are the cases you'll see a lot more activating, but unlikely for that to happen earlier on for fearful avoidance.
Yeah, and I know I've heard from people in the past. Sometimes when a fearful avoidant leaves, the person really has no clue kind of what happened. And, friendships as well, this goes for friendships, where something happened and then they're noticing, hey, my fearful avoidant partner or friend is just like disappeared. Like they're stopping to call me, or maybe they give me one word answers. Like they're really starting to, like, obviously there's something wrong, but they're not saying exactly what's going on in their mind. And I know from personal experience that's happened to me as well. A couple times I felt like I couldn't tell the person exactly what was going on or how they were, like, doing something that I wasn't cool with, but I just didn't have, like, the words and sort of the courage to set the boundary. So that poor person was sort of left to be like, what did I do? Like, probably to this day, there's probably people who are wondering, like, where did Mike go? We used to be such good friends like 15 years ago. But, I just want to acknowledge, like, obviously it's very hurtful, for a person to think that they have a really good connection with someone and that things are seemingly going well. And then all of a sudden the other person just sort of disappears and they're left to sort of try to put together the pieces and figure out, okay, where did I go wrong? What did I do wrong? So,
And I think, it's so interesting. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day who was fearful avoidant leaning DA.
mhm,
She was in a friendship group, and she said, this is about her. So she's my friend, but she has, like, a friendship group she grew up with separately. She's a more recent friend. And
mhm,
she said to me, there was an issue in her friendship group, and her friendship group is people she's known for, like, decades, like 25 years. And she said, one of the women and another woman in the friend group, they did something that was kind of offensive, and it definitely was, like, them in the wrong objectively, like, it was some unhealthy behaviors, but they weren't terrible. They were just, they definitely existed and needed to be hashed out. And it was so interesting because she was like, "I don't need friends like this." And
mhm,
she went right into, like, "I'm just taking a step back. I don't need friends like this. I have too much going on for this, da da da," which I understand. But I think this brings up this really important point, which is the difference between a fearful avoidant or secure person and secure person taking a step back in a relationship is when you're fearful avoidant, it's not like you don't even have the words. That's true. You don't have the words to express, but you don't even realize that you could express. It's like out of your awareness. And
yeah.
I knew, and I said to her, I was like, "Hey, do you think if you talked about it, it could be a solvable problem?" And I saw her react and she was like, "What would I say?" And, and I said, "Oh, you just approach it and say, 'Hey, this affected me and here's what I would need instead. And this is a boundary for me going forward.'" And then
Mhm,
be vulnerable in your conversation. You've known this friend for decades. And she was like, "Oh, I guess I could." At the time, she didn't even have the awareness that that was, like, a possibility or a thing. And so I think what happens is there's such a quick, if you could watch your mind in slow motion, you would see that it's like hurt, shut down, justification for why we're shutting down.
mhm,
And what a secure person does if they're going to take a step back from a friendship group or a long-standing relationship is they'll go, hurt, is it solvable? Try to solve it. And if they attempt to solve it and they try it once or twice, or, depending on how big of an issue the thing is, they check to see if it's solvable. They'll communicate about how it affected them. They will have a conversation. Then, if over time they've tried to communicate and they don't see the problem solved for, they're like, well, they have to take a step back. That's the logical, rational, healthy thing for me to do out of self-respect. But fearful avoidance, they miss that whole middle ground, which is arguably one of the most important things in relationships, which is people are never going to be perfect. People are going to affect us sometimes. They're going to hurt us by accident. They're going to say or do the wrong things or forget important things. And so we have to be able to be like, hey, can we actually build our relationship solving skills or problem solving skills in relationships, and be able to have
Mhm.
conversations that are like, hey, that affected me. What can we do differently, and try to map those things out instead of just going straight into deactivation.
Yeah, exactly. That's so interesting. So the majority of the comments I see sometimes on, let's say, YouTube videos where it says, "Oh, I have to walk on eggshells for my DA partner." Would that sort of also apply for FAs? Because you kind of like
Totally.
have to be perfect in essence. Like you have to like not really do anything that they might not like. So there would be a fear that you also have to walk on eggshells for an FA. Would that be fair to say as well, or is that?
Absolutely. It's slightly different. So DAs, the reason people walk on eggshells is because DAs will never even tell you the information they need. They'll just shut down when they feel hurt. Fearful avoidance will often shut down, and then at points they may lash out. But and the sad part is that often fearful avoidants think they're communicating when they're lashing out, but you're not communicating, you're just fighting. And there's
Mhm.
seriously such a substantial difference. And I say this as a prior FA who, like, so I'm not giving fearful avoidants a hard time, but it's like the absolute truth. Like, I can look back on past relationships and look at things that I guarantee, if I had the language then, could have been solvable problems, but I would just hold things in, and then I would just say, "You don't care. You're this, you're that, and I'm name calling, or I'm saying things from like a space of harshness, or not, maybe not even name calling, but saying like, "You never do this. You don't care at all," like making accusations, right?
Yeah.
And like that's not communicating about a problem. It's not trying to solve a problem. It's not doing anything constructive. Even if I'm name calling or making accusations about something, right? And I'm not proud of that at the time, by the way. Like, did a lot of work on that. Actually, at points, called people I dated and apologized for my behavior when I started to do the work, made amends. But you know, when I look back on that, it's so interesting because at the time I would have been like, I do communicate. I say all the things the person's not doing, and I tell them that I know they don't care. But it's like,
Yeah.
wait, that's not doing anything to mend fences. That's not doing anything to like share my inner world and say, hey, I'm needing a little bit more ABC in the relationship, or a little more consistency, or a little more effort in this particular area, or hey, I need to know that we're on the same page with XYZ. Like, nothing constructive, nothing meaningful, just getting mad at somebody out of the blue for something that I was holding in for sometimes long periods of time first.
Like what you were doing before is in essence, you just want them to sort of feel the pain that they made you feel. You're not trying to solve a problem. You're not trying to really let them know on the inside why that would feel that way, to let them know, your inner reality. You're kind of like, you made me feel this pain and I'm going to like, let.
Yeah, and it's not like it was like, I can't wait to hurt you back. Like, it's not like it's like evil or premeditated or something like that, but it's like you reach a boiling point, and it's not intentional, but I would notice, like, if I look back at past relationship patterns, I would not say something that was really hurting me. I would hold
Mhm.
it in, and
Mhm.
then then a tiny thing would happen that would be like the straw that broke the camel's back, like the cupboard left open or something so small, and I would make such a big deal about that, like, and it was like, well, actually, if I was honest with myself and had the emotional literacy and had the self-awareness at the time, I would have been able to say, well, it was actually that 3 days ago, this situation was happening, or 3 hours ago, that situation was happening. And maybe it was something that made me feel insecure, or maybe it was something that somebody said something and it landed poorly with me and made me feel a little bit offended, or, or maybe a buildup of some things like that over time. But I would hold them in. And then I would get really mad about some small thing that had nothing to do with the actual problem. And so really it was like I hit a boiling point, get angry with my words, be really critical or harsh. And it's like, it's hilarious in a sense. It's not hilarious because it's sad for people
Yeah.
involved, right? But, like, it's so mind-blowing to me now where it's like, wow, like, that A, it hurts a lot to do that to somebody and to live that way, but B, it's crazy, like, when you don't have that self-awareness, you think that you're communicating by picking a fight or arguing, but that literally has nothing to do with communication. It's like out of 100, it's like zero communication. Like
Yeah.
just lashing out about something unrelated to what's hurting you, you're not communicating at all. And
Yeah.
so actual communication is like in real time, I can positively frame, hey, I'm needing ABC instead of you never do ABC. I can
Mhm.
frame what I do need instead of what I'm upset about. And I can talk about it and hash that out with somebody or say if I felt hurt and we can come up with strategies for resolution and I can check in with them too. And that's
Mhm.
communication.
Mhm.
But it's just wild to me to think like at points I had no idea how to do that and had no I couldn't even make like minor strides towards doing that. So it's
Yeah.
hard and it's something so important to work on as a fearful avoidant.
100%. And one last thing on this point before we move on to the next one. Is there also a fear of abandonment on the other side where it's like, hey, if I start asserting myself, if I start setting boundaries, if I start speaking up when I don't like something, is there also the fear of abandonment of, hey, my friends who've known me for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it may be, they know me and we sort of connected with the way that I am and the way that they are. If I do all this inner work and make all these sort of big sweeping changes, is there a fear that these people won't wanna stick around anymore and be like, "Oh, that's not the Mike I know, or that's not the Thais I know." So I would wanna be for that
Absolutely.
abandonment sort of fear on the other side.
That's such a powerful question, and you hit the nail on the head. Absolutely, that's the case. And it's funny because it's the fear of abandonment on the other side, but I was thinking really deeply into it and like feeling into it when you said that. It's fear of abandonment for sure, but it's also this really big fear for a lot of fearful avoidance of like hurting or offending people. And I think that there's this deep fear of like, oh my gosh, I feel responsible for people's feelings. A lot of fearful avoidance grow up in enmeshed or codependent family dynamics.
Yeah.
And and it's almost this fear of wait, what if I hurt you? What if I affect you? And then I'm gonna feel so terrible about it, and I don't wanna feel guilty, so I'm just gonna do everything right and not speak up for my needs and not set boundaries because I don't wanna hurt anybody and then feel awful about it. But then it's like, by not doing those things, you eventually lash out and you hurt people way worse than if you just set a boundary or just and most of the time, boundaries are not hurtful, it's just the perception of thinking that they will be hurtful if you grew up in a master codependent family.
Does that also touch on the I am bad for a wound in the sense that FAs have the I am bad, so they know how hurtful that wound is to carry, so they don't wanna dare make somebody else feel bad for, when they set a boundary. If they were to feel bad, they'd be like, "Oh my god, I'm so sorry, like, I don't want you to feel like you're a bad person."
Exactly, and they don't wanna feel like they're a bad person, Like, there's times I can look back on things where I would self-silence a lot, like, in friendships or different relationships because I didn't wanna speak up and hurt somebody's feelings, and then feel like, "Oh my gosh, now they think I'm a terrible person." And then, you hold things in, and then you say an offhanded comment that's so so much worse than if you just set a boundary, and it's like, that's never going to be a constructive way of doing things.
Yeah, exactly.
I just wanted to jump in here and let you know that we are doing a 14-day free trial to the All Access Membership Pass at PDS, which means you get access to literally everything inside of the school. And this includes the 4 live webinars I do with our students every single week. And on top of that, you get access to all of our different courses. We have over 55 different courses on relationships, communication, boundaries, emotional mastery, guilt and shame, learning your needs, so many different facets that are really important to master our lives and feel really good about our lives going forward. And last but not least, there's a daily community event. We have trained facilitators and coaches who are in there doing that work, showing up to support you on your journey every single day. Please join me on the other side. Come check it out. See if it's a fit for you. I'd love to see you there. Go ahead and sign up by clicking the link in the description box below.
So our next one of, why an FA might leave a relationship is if they're feeling criticized, or it would be like a consistent criticism. So if your partner is like kind of picking at you and saying things that are really hurtful and like touching your core wounds, that an FA might just like dip and be like, I'm out of here. I don't want to be in this relationship. What's behind that? Obviously nobody wants to be criticized, but why is that such a deep wound that they're like, I probably need to get out of this relationship?
Yeah, it's such a great one, Mike, and it's like it's one of those that, like, will cause somebody to leave all of a sudden again, where fearful avoidants do such a good job in the early dating stages and even honeymoon stage of the relationship of, like, getting to know somebody so well, and all the things they like and that make them tick and showing up and being there for them. But then if they start getting like constant criticism because they often feel like they're overextending themselves and going out of their way for things, then if they feel like somebody's still demanding more, this goes hand in hand with expectations, which we talked about as fearful avoidant triggers recently, but that can be something that causes them to feel really overwhelmed and pressured. But on top of that, fearful avoidants are often operating from these subconscious I am bad and I am unworthy wounds. So they're always trying to earn their worth. They're always trying to make sure they don't seem like a bad person and don't have to feel guilty about hurting anybody's feelings. And so when they try so hard to do that and to be as perfect as they can and never make mistakes in the relationship, and then they feel criticized, they usually, have a lot of internal shame that comes up, a lot of deep wounding around that. And, oftentimes they'll start by going out of their way more and trying to, mend fences and improve whatever the person's criticizing them about. And then usually they'll just hit a tipping point. Fearful avoidants make a lot of decisions from like knowing that they don't like something, not communicating about it, and knowing that they are going to reach a tipping point and then waiting for that tipping point. It is very common for fearful avoidance in relationships to be like, I'm not happy. I love and care about this person, but I'm not happy with, these 9 things that are going on. They can have a running long laundry list. And they're like, if these things keep happening, eventually I'm going to get frustrated enough. I'm going to leave.
Yeah.
And they will not communicate it to their partner. Listen, this isn't all fearful avoidance, but there's a good chunk of fearful avoidance who probably experience this. They don't communicate. They hold it in. They hold it in. They wait until they basically felt enough pain that they know that now that pain of leaving will be less painful than the pain of staying. And they're almost waiting for that to happen. And then all of a sudden they'll cut ties and run for the hills. And that is where people on the receiving end will be like, wait, why did this person leave all of a sudden? And for the person on the receiving end, it absolutely is all of a sudden. For the person on the other end, the fearful avoid themselves, it's not all of a sudden at all. It's been a buildup of things. But because they never communicated it, it's actually on the fearful avoidant to communicate it. Because if you don't communicate, then you never know if it would have been improved or if it would have been a solvable problem. And so they leave all of a sudden, but oftentimes from the other person's from their perspective, it was like there was a big buildup of things.
So in essence, just how we talk a lot about how the DA kind of has this fantasy that there's this perfect person out there. Would the FA also have that sort of ideal thing where they think, oh, this partner is just not for me. I'm not going to speak up. It just seems like they don't have what I need, or it seems like they trigger me a lot, and I just don't think, they're right for me. So there's probably somebody else out there who will be better for me.
Yeah, I would say that when they're in that space, they're more focusing on like the person in front of them. Like it's less usually like, oh, there's a fantasy of somebody to come. For sure, they can like fearful avoidance can have like crushes or be in limerence with people and sometimes people outside of a relationship. It's fairly common for FAs, APs, honestly, DAs too sometimes, right? Like it can be for all insecure attachment styles. So that can happen, but I would call that as separate from, like, having a fantasy about this ideal person that, like, "Oh, it's not this person, I'm gonna find that ideal person." It's more like, "This person's hurting me, it's not working, I need to get out, I need to flee." It's more of like a flight response, and then over time, they may start dating somebody else, and again, it's sort of like the cycle kind of repeat.
Okay, super interesting. I have a question. It's a little bit funny, but not really. I think it's probably relevant to what we're talking about. Would you say, as part of your healing as an FA, you know, we know you've probably dropped certain people over the years, relationships, and what we talked about, how the person to this day might have zero clue of the actual reason why you left. As part of your healing and becoming more secure, is this something that would be good for your healing to go back and maybe contact that relationship you had 10 years ago, contact that best friend that you had 15 years ago, and let them know, hey, like, I've done a lot of growing and healing and whatnot. And, I realized 15 years ago when we ended the friendship, you probably had no idea why I left and don't have any closure on it. I'd like to share with you sort of what was going on for me at the time and why it was sort of so scary for me to share.
I believe in, like, making amends so much. I've done this with people in the past who were friends. I've done this with ex-partners, like, literally just from the place of, like there's 2 motivating factors. Number 1, I believe so much in, like, apologizing. Even if you did 5% and somebody did 95%, own your 5%, air it, bring it to the surface, be humble, ask forgiveness, like you are released from that. And that was actually something in my own journey, like really based off of like the one of the 12 steps, to make amends. Like one of those things was like, hey, I'm gonna do this in relationships. I'm gonna call people. I'm gonna go and have those conversations. And like the first time I did, I remember I was so nervous, and then it was like so relieving. Like I was like, wow, that was so
Yeah.
cathartic. And then I just became a believer in that and did that throughout my life for things. But I think
Yeah.
the real healing for me, so that was, like, healing retroactively for sure, but for me, coming from fearful avoidant to secure, one thing I learned to do better over the years, is to manage people's expectations better. Because I feel like I'm the type of person, honestly, where, like, I care so deeply about people and I show up so much, and I often, like, am really good still, this is, like, a fearful avoidant thing, but it's not like you lose your personality when, things go awry, you just rewire the negative parts, the downsides, right? The challenging parts and the
Mhm.
triggers, but
Mhm.
I learned to, manage people's expectations better because, like, I'm the type of person, if somebody's going through a hard time, I will be there and I'll show up and I'll go above and beyond, and I'm, like, really good in when somebody's going through a crisis. But then when people are like, "Everything's good, everything's fine," I'm like, "Oh, they're good now." So I don't have to, like, show up 10 out of 10, and I'll usually take a
Yeah.
step back and, chat with people, but, I recharge more as an introvert, and I know nobody ever is everybody's always surprised by that, but I'm an INFJ, and I
Yeah.
really need quiet time and alone time, and so when I'm busy or working a lot, or, I've got, like, a lot of I'm really close with my family at this point, which is such a blessing, and obviously, I have my husband and, like, so there's all these things going on, and so sometimes I won't stay as in touch, if somebody wants to talk on the phone, like, a couple times a week or things like that,
Yeah.
like, I'm
Mhm.
more like, "Hey, let's touch base once a week and let's text through, from t time to time," and I'm, like, kind of more of a high level person in that way with a I don't wanna say all friendships that I have, but, like, for a good bit of them because I had a lot of friends I grew up with or friends because I lived in different countries and things like that. So anyways, all of this to say, the one thing I learned over the years that was really important for me was to manage people's expectations. Like, I have this
Yeah.
friend from high school that and, really, really care about him dearly, and he's the type of friend that if you're close to him, he's like, "Let's talk every day." And
For
for
sure.
me, even though he's like a brother to me and I've grown up with him and known him for so long, I'm just not gonna be available to talk every day. And so, I've over the years said that. I've actually had conversations that are like, "Hey, I care about this friendship so much and I have
Mhm.
so many things like vying for my attention right now. And so I'm going to be able to chat like once a week or every couple weeks. And I'll send some texts here and there, but I just want to manage. And I've literally used the term like with the words like manage your expectations about how much I'll be around. And that's
Mhm.
not a lack of like care for you. That's just me having to be mindful of all these different things kind of commanding my attention right now and where my
Yeah.
priorities have to be. And so, and that was a really good conversation and a really good
Sure.
thing. Anyways, and I've done that in a whole bunch of various ways over the years. Is like I've learned to be more clear about what I am available for and not, and then had really open, transparent conversations about that. And that's when those friendships or relationships remain the most harmonious long term as well.
100%. And then the person, yeah, because if you don't have the words or sort of the courage to share, "Hey, I'm just so busy right now," you're probably just gonna stop. You'll see their call coming through or their messages and just kinda put the phone down.
Like, I'll get back to it, and then you forget,
Yeah,
but if
you
life
forget.
is really busy or things
And
like
then
that. Yeah.
they start feeling unimportant and like you don't care. And, you know, they'll see, "Oh, hey, before we had this sort of everyday communication, and now all of a sudden, with no explanation, they're, only reaching out to me once a week or once every 2 weeks." So really all it takes is a quick conversation and be like, "Hey, just really busy season right now."
And
And
it's always so positive, like, it goes so well, like, the person I validate, like, the friendship or the person. I say really clearly what my expectations are, I share why, which you don't have to, like, explain yourself to, like, Bob down the road, like, out strangers, but, like, to close friends you've known for a long time. I think it's nice to share, "Here's, like, what my life is like right now, the
yeah.
things that are commanding my attention, the directions I'm pulled towards,
Mhm.
validate, and here's where I'm at," and I think that, like, transparency really helps people, like, have more insight and not take it personally, and then you've
Yeah.
validated them, and so they feel like you care, and then there's consistency in what you said you could do, and then things get
Mhm.
so much easier. So that was actually a really big lesson for me to learn as a fearful avoidant later on.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll go on to our next item on the list. FAs can get really, really upset and leave a relationship if they're feeling incapable or dumb or foolish. So I know for sure for DAs, and I used to have this big time, and I probably still have sometimes some lingering feelings about this appearing dumb or foolish or like I am not smart or wound. Why is the FA? Why is this so big in FA as well? Or why was it so big for you, let's say, in the past?
Yeah, it's such an interesting one. So this one usually goes as a cover wound for I will be betrayed. And obviously we talked in the last episode about I will be betrayed. I wouldn't say there's many fearful avoidants who feel like I am stupid as the core wound is like dumb. That can happen, but it's a lot less that. It's more fooled. Um,
Fooled?
fooled,
Okay.
have the wool pulled over my eyes. And it's because if
Yeah.
you grew up in an environment where you couldn't trust,
Yeah.
then you're often scared to trust. And one thing that was so interesting in my own journey is I had such a big betrayal core wound. And I remember trying to work on that betrayal core wound and having all this resistance to it when I would sit down to do it. Because we talk about in PDS, like how there's all these exercises for rewiring core wounds, and you can leverage principles of neuroplasticity and literally change these things, whether it's abandonment or betrayal or, fear of being trapped. And by the way, I'll put a link for free to anybody who wants to take a course on that fully for free for a limited time. But you can rewire these things. I remember like doing, I did a whole bunch of work in this area, a whole certification in hypnotherapy and how you can rewire your subconscious mind, and started reading about and researching neuroplasticity and all these things. And I remember sitting down being like, I'm going to do this work on this wound. And I had first done other wounds and had a lot of success, and it was pretty easy. And I was like, cool, this is going to be my next one. I was like, oh, it's going to be a hard one. And I would just resist it. And then I explored further and I was like, oh, it's because I'm scared that if I do work on being betrayed, I'm assuming that I'll be fooled. And I'm scared of letting this big defensive guard down because I'm assuming that then I'm going to be fooled and I'm going to be stupid for believing somebody or trusting so much or all these different things. So actually to
Mhm.
work on that first, why it's healthy to trust, why it's important to, it's not stupid to trust, it's not foolish to trust, all these limiting beliefs I had about trust itself first.
Yeah.
And so then by working through those things first and seeing like, hey, being able to trust doesn't mean that I'm, like, trusting the stranger at 2 AM in the alleyway with my wallet. Like, it's not like I'm, like I can still be cautious. And so it made me I would picture in my mind, like, trust like how a secure person trusts, right? They have a baseline of trust that's healthy, then they allow somebody space to actually earn trust over time. Like, if you're gonna trust anybody with your wallet, for example, you know,
Mhm.
it's definitely not gonna be the stranger at 2 AM, and it's probably not gonna be somebody after your first date. But maybe as you get to know somebody longer or things like that, then things change. You build that original baseline of trust up. So I used to have this fear too, like, oh, if I'm vulnerable, then I'll be fooled too. Like, oh, so don't let your guard down, keep your walls up, keep everything. And so that was actually such an important wound to work on because it was
Yeah.
stopping me from being vulnerable. And
Mhm.
this is, what so many FAs will be able to relate to and also experience. And if you can't be vulnerable, then you're not communicating your feelings, you're not communicating your needs, you're probably not communicating your boundaries. And that's going to lead to you then feeling unfulfilled in a relationship. And eventually you're going to be like, I have to head for the hills, I have to run. But really, and I can't stress how important this is for people. You really have to like listen to this deeply to hear it. You won't feel loved in the way that you need unless you communicate what it is that you need. Like you're never gonna feel, loved the right way by somebody if you can't tell them, hey, when you say this, it affects me. When you don't do this, it's actually something really important to me. I need a little more of this in the relationship. And you have to see that the person when you communicate it shows up, but the vast majority of the time you absolutely will. But if you
Mhm.
never communicate it, then you're never giving people the information they need to love you in a way that's true for you. And so you're only showing yourself with conditions. You're only making room to be loved conditionally. And it's always going to feel like love never really reaches that deep. It's going to be more superficial and infatuation based than like really building deep roots. And so it's funny, but that I am stupid core wound or the fear of being foolish. And we use I am stupid as the terminology because that's what people will often say, but it's really like a foolishness for fearful avoidance. Um, that wound will stop you from being able to open up and let your guard down, which in turn will cause you to feel like relationships are not really meeting everything that you need. And it's easier to walk
Yeah.
away and it's less valuable to invest in them long term. And so it really is important so that if fearful avoidant doesn't leave a relationship all of a sudden.
That's so interesting. And the partner is, maybe trying their best to love them the way that they think that they want to be loved, but they could be doing it totally opposite and not even really knowing. And then one day the person leaves and it's like, oh, geez, where did I screw up there? Things seem like they were going pretty well.
Anybody who's been watching this podcast knows that you date mostly FAs. We're like, I don't think I've ever dated an anxious person, which was like so surprising to me, even as your friend for like a decade plus. But
Friends, we had a lot of anxious friendships in the past, a lot.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if you ever had a fearful wouldn't leave out of all of a sudden, and if you thought like a time, or even somebody you dated where you thought you were loving them in exactly the right way. And because it's funny, we kind of touched on this briefly a few weeks ago, and we had so many people be like in the comments, "Thank you so much. This helped me so much to hear." And we were talking about how like often a fearful avoidant doesn't communicate. And so the dismissive avoidance, like trying to love them and thinks they're doing a great job. And then the fearful avoidance, like, no, it was missing the mark. So I'm curious if you were ever like, just to describe to people listening the inner world of that.
Yeah. If I had to think like just quickly about past relationships and this happening, I don't know if they were like fearful, leaning secure, but I felt like they always said something and just said like, this is not working for me, or like, I need like a more of a long-term commitment, or like they would sort of like say something and just say like, they kind of wouldn't leave it open for like, hey, let's work on this, or hey, this is something that means a lot to me. Let's work on this and see if what we can do. It was sort of more like, I can't do this anymore. They sort of like had it up to here and said, I'm leaving. This is too much.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like, so you had to have so many things go wrong to suddenly get to that point that you didn't communicate first. Like, if you're communicating from a point of this is too much, I have to leave.
Yeah.
There's so many times you didn't communicate first to see if it was a solvable problem, and that's where it's so important for fearful winds to work on that.
Yeah. And my DA side was never like really super upset at it at the moment. I was kind of like, okay, fine, like see you later. That was kind of partially due to one foot in, one foot out. I talked about this before, like never really like opening myself to the potential of like really being with this person and really showing my inner self to this person. So there wasn't like a super, super deep emotional connection. Um, Sometimes even past relationships felt even more like friendships, where I was like, we have such an awesome time hanging out together, a lot of laughs, a lot of fun. But I think the other partner always wanted more, and I was not willing to go in that direction. And then I think they just eventually said, I'm leaving. Like, I don't see this changing anytime soon. And then they would just leave. So that's sort of what I experienced. But I think only in friendships, there's a few that the person just dropped off. But as I was becoming more secure, I never took it personal. I just
Yeah.
thought, you know what, they're either going through something, or they're afraid to say exactly what was on their mind. And like, I'm gonna think about it for a little bit and be like, I wonder what happened there. I wonder if I did something or whatever. But I wouldn't like, sit on it for weeks and months and be like, oh, why did this happen? I more so just thought, like I said, they either didn't want to say what was really going on, or they're just going through something at the moment. Yeah. So that's been my experience with that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I want to say something I just want to go back and highlight something you said there for a moment, which is, saying it in different words is just like you'll never, this is such an important lesson for me. Like, I was pretty good always with like friendships and having like real connections and friendships. But even then, like I wouldn't like let people in as much as they let me in. Like I would sort of these like one-way relationships a lot of the time and like be there for them, but not really share too much with them. And same with romantic relationships. Like I would always have my guard up in the past, like obviously prior to meeting my now husband. And like you'll never get out of love, like, what's actually possible when you're never being vulnerable. Like, I think it's just such an important thing for anybody who's FIRDA. Like, when you have a hardened heart, when you're shut down and your walls are up, like, you'll only get, like, 20% out of a relationship of what's possible if you're never letting somebody see you and love you, and you're never sharing your needs, and you're never sharing your flaws or weaknesses, and you'll see a direct correlation when you're vulnerable and somebody accepts you like that, and it's just like that's exactly, and like, it's just so important for people to hear that because
Yeah.
that's like how we really deepen connection. And there's two parts of connection, right, in relationships. There's infatuation-based connection, which is great and fun, but that research shows you that doesn't really last to the same degree beyond the end of the honeymoon stage. We have that for the dating stage, the honeymoon stage, and then that sort of peters off. And that seems like that's a bad thing, but that's actually a great thing because that's when you get to deepen the connection more in an unconditional way by showing yourself with less and less conditions. And then you still have infatuation there. It's not like it goes away in total. It's not at this peak or climatic point neurochemically, but we pair that with like the ability to really like love and be loved and let each other in and understand each other more deeply. And that's like the power of what love is. And I think when we look at a relationship and you look at the 6 stages of relationships, dating stage, honeymoon stage, and we have power struggle, stability, commitment, and bliss stages, the dating and honeymoon stage are a very small part of the total life cycle of a relationship. And if it's a year and a half to 2 years in the first two stages, and then most couples or marriages spend, 30, 40 years if they survive through the next stages, that's the tiniest little bit of the iceberg. And so what a relationship is supposed to be about is much more than just that infatuation. And that comes with the biggest requirement actually being about vulnerability.
Yeah, no, that was a game changer for me in relationships was starting to show the vulnerability. At first, because you've been hiding for so long and like hiding these parts of yourself and worried, you sort of drip it out slowly. And then when you see that like the other person is like, okay, like that's amazing. Like, thanks for sharing that with me. And they feel way more bonded to you. And like when you see that they accept you and still want to be with you after showing these parts that you deem as like so terrible or so shameful, that's like healing. You're like, oh my gosh, like maybe these things that I have inside of me are not that bad. That's like, no, of course. Like everybody has some stuff going on inside of them. Like you're not exempt to not ever having insecurities or core wounds or whatever. So another person, like when you are vulnerable as well, you also give the other person permission to be vulnerable and open up. And then you're just like seeing each other, see each other, see each other, like just opening. And then it's to the point where like you're not trying to hide anything. You're free and you can be yourself. And it's like the best feeling, just being accepted for 100% you, not trying to be any certain way. And yeah, it's super freeing. Of
Absolutely.
course, it's hard at the beginning, but just slowly try to be more vulnerable and just notice the reaction on the other side. So,
Absolutely. And it's interesting. That's what intimacy is. It's like being able to truly see somebody and to know them. And that's only built through
yeah,
the vulnerability itself. So, yeah,
exactly.
I love that. Okay, let's do the next one.
Okay, they might leave a relationship suddenly if they feel like they're being attacked.
Yeah, and this sort of like leapfrogs off of the last one, like the criticize part, like if they feel attacked or things like that. I will say fearful avoidants take words a lot less personally than actions as a general rule. For sure, words can still hurt them. But
Mhm.
if somebody says, it calls you a name or says you don't care or makes an accusation or something in an argument, a lot of times fearful avoidants are going to be like, oh, we were just angry. It's fine. Not
Yeah,
saying that that's healthy, not condoning that, but oftentimes the themes that I'll see with fearful avoidance is they take words less personally than actions, which
yeah,
is interesting because, like, you can speak to this as a dismissive avoidant in the past, like, we're a fearful avoidant if a fearful avoidant like doesn't show up or forgets something or cancels plans or doesn't call or doesn't make an effort around something that matters. Actions, that's what fearful avoidants will tend to take to heart. And it's so interesting,
yeah,
like me having been FA and you being DA in the past, like, my husband and I went through this, like, Graham and I went through this, and it was like, I would notice over time when we were in our power struggle stage years ago, I noticed that, like, if he wouldn't do something, that would affect me so much more than if he ever was like, "Why did you do that?" Or, like, gave me a hard time about something, and it was like, "Whoa, I get hurt so much more by actions," and I started going out because I was working with clients at the time and asking them.
mhm,
I came to the conclusion, like, with pretty much no exceptions, that dismissal wins are hurt a lot more by words, but fearful wins are often hurt a lot more by actions. And so it's interesting how, like, oftentimes, like, the attacked and the reason I said the attacked part, w
yeah,
is just that, like, fearful avoidants, if they do feel attacked, they can over defend themselves. They can have really strong fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses where they flee or they fight back too hard for something small, or
Yeah.
they freeze in certain cases if they're stressed, or they fawn until they get frustrated and then they fight or flight. But you'll see, like, how that can show up for them. But I'm curious what your thoughts are, just noticing that difference in how each style
Yeah.
its actions.
Yeah, no, that was a big help for me in all my fearful avoidant relationships. Because before, like, for me, when somebody cancels plans, it's like a celebration. Like, I'm happy. I don't get upset at all. In fact, I'm like pretty stoked if somebody cancels plans, or like we're supposed to have a phone call, they can't make it. Like, I never get offended at canceled plans. To me, I'm like, great, got con, this is perfect. But then I realized FAs, if you say you're gonna do something and like don't do it, you can get away with that like a few times, but they're gonna eventually get pretty upset and feel quite unimportant and like they don't matter. So I'm really, really conscious now of like if I say something, like I know I have to put it on my mental list of like I'm gonna do that. Like, when you say something like you're gonna do something for someone, like they mention I don't know, they're looking for a job and you're like, oh, actually I know somebody who might be hiring at their company. I'll reach out to them and then try to connect you guys. In the past, I would think I was being helpful just by saying that, and I wouldn't always, like, follow up with it, like, it wouldn't be high priority, or I would just be in sort of, like, low level fight or flight and then just go back to worrying about myself. But on the other end, I realized, like, no, you made that sort of promise, and then you're just completely abandoning it, so the other person's gonna feel kind of upset, like, "Hey, like, you said you were gonna do something for me." And just in general, like, you should be what is it from the 4 agreements? Be impeccable with your word.
With your word, yeah.
Yeah, like, don't so now I'm really conscious of, like, not say if I know I can't do something, I'm, like, stopping myself, like, "Will I actually do this, or do I have the time, or do I have the even the desire to, like, help somebody who I don't know too well?" But, definitely notice that where, if you say something to somebody fearful avoidant, and then you don't do it, that incongruency shows up, and they're like, "Oh, this person talks a lot, but they don't back it up with action. So this is probably not a person I want to, associate with."
Oh,
Um,
interesting. It's good that you noticed that too. Like, if you're ever in a position where you're seeing it, and it's good too because it forces that, like, extra piece of accountability to, like, really be impeccable with your word, which is such an important practice for everybody. Honestly, something like secure people can work on in general. Like, it can be something for anybody at any time, that, like, follow through on what you say and all of that. So, um, okay, let's do the last one and then we'll wrap the episode.
okay. Very last one is being taken advantage of. So as we know, from fearful, where kind of even senses that somebody's trying to take advantage of them because they're used to sort of taking advantage of themselves so much. When it happens externally, they're like, hell no, like I'm out of here. So I'm curious, did that ever happen with you in a past relationship, or if you want to just speak to sort of the psychology behind that?
I think both. So, it's definitely the fearful avoidance shadow. Like, fearful avoidants take advantage of themselves to please other people all the time, and they will literally give of themselves, which is very generous and very beautiful. But if it's leading to resentment and then ultimately the breakdown of your relationships, then it's not actually generous in the long term, because you're giving a lot in the short term and then you run out of things to give or show up for in the long term, and it can be the downfall. And so for me, it was something I really had to work on. It goes hand in hand with boundaries, and really hand in hand with when I was younger and fearful avoidant. I had this compulsion to say yes. Like, I would just feel like I had to say yes, and part of that came from enmeshment and things like that. But part of it was that I never grew up in a household where I really could take myself into consideration, because it was always sort of like, what's going on around you and how do you cope in this kind of environment? And so I had to hyper consider and, be hyper vigilant about what was happening outside of me. And then I felt really guilty for how people were feeling. So I would take on their feelings and try to make sure everybody was okay. And so it was so healing for me, and it was honestly one of the last things that really shifted in my experience. And I'm sure I'll have other, like, things to heal, but as it relates to, like, attachment style specific, um, it was one of the hardest things for me to work on, was just being able to, in real time, consider myself before saying yes or no. And when you really learn the art of taking yourself into consideration, it's not just a yes or no. So I always give the analogy, like, if I have a neighbor who comes over and they're like, "Hey, Thais, your day off is Sunday? on Sunday, I need you to help me clean my whole house all day. I could love that neighbor. I could feel like that neighbor is like the best person. I really care about them. But it doesn't mean that I'm just going to compulsively say yes to like cleaning their house with them all day Sunday. If
Mm.
instead, I'm like, oh, I really care about this person. I would love to help them. They're always so sweet to me and kind to me. I might be like, hey, I can't do all day Sunday. I'll come by for an hour in the morning. Or, hey, it's my day off. I'm not really going to do anything in regards to cleaning your house with you, but I'll come by and bring you some breakfast. Or, like things like that where you'll start to realize that there is a gray area and you have to feel into it of like, wait, maybe it's a no for me to the request, but is there something I
Yeah.
can do? And sometimes it's a no overall. Sometimes it's I just can't make it, or something of that nature. But being able to really consider yourself over time, you'll start to see your true yeses and nos, and it's a practice. If you grew up in a household where that wasn't the case, which is so common for so many people,
Yeah.
and it's a practice, like, you really have to rinse and repeat and practice it consciously for at least that 21 days it takes to rewire your neural pathways, but, it's also one of the most important things ever that stops you from taking advantage of yourself to please others, that stops you from then feeling taken advantage of by others and then betrayed by
Yeah.
them as a result, and then cause you to feel like, "Oh, I just need to push the person away," instead of actually being able to hash things out and talk them through.
Yeah. Would there have been, guilt in the household growing up where if you didn't say yes or wanna do something, then you feel guilty? And then in adult life, somebody asks you to do something, and you feel like, "If I don't do this, I'm the only person who can help them, so I have to, like, step up because 'cause they're my friend."
Absolutely. Guilt,
Yeah.
and fear of people being hurt and alone, which I
Yeah.
think is a projection of having felt hurt and alone as a child, and
Yeah.
not feeling like it's okay for anybody else to feel. And there's something beautiful about that on one hand, where you care a lot
Yeah.
about people and can empathize deeply, but it can really be a double-edged sword where you can weaponize that degree of empathy against yourself if you're empathizing for I always say to people, like, your empathy for here for people, if you're a fearful one's probably up here. And the art of being able to sustain that empathy and that consistency and that quality of relationship to people you care about is not about subtracting your empathy. It's about learning to empathize with yourself equally. It's like an addition, not a subtraction. And that was a really hard practice for me because I would always feel into what everybody else was feeling around me and not pay attention to my own feelings until there was like, if everybody else is good, then I have room for me.
Yeah.
And I really had to learn to undo that through a lot of practice and consistency. And I had
Sure.
to learn, okay, here's the empathy for other people. I'm down here. I have to learn to take myself into consideration equally to everybody, attune to my feelings as much as I'm attuning to others. And it's a practice that is hard, but it's honestly life changing. And I highly recommend for any fearful avoidant.
Yeah. And to add one more thing to that, I think what people might not realize too is sometimes you're like truly hindering somebody's growth if you constantly are like stepping up. Like if somebody keeps asking you for money, like, hey, like, this month's just been tough. Like, please, I need a few dollars for rent. Well, then you feel like, oh, I don't want them to, get kicked out of their apartment or, have to leave their house. So you give them money. Next month comes, hey, I'm hurting. Then after a while, it's like, am I being taken advantage of here? Or like, if I stop giving this person money, maybe they're gonna figure out, hey, like I gotta figure out my own stuff. I can't just keep doing this strategy, which is not gonna work forever. So I just want people to realize, like, you also, when you say no, sometimes that's like the best thing you can do for someone because they've just been sort of enabled and helped along in an area that they haven't strengthened yet. So you're almost like kind of pushing them to, hey, like, I don't want you to have to sleep outside, but you better start like figuring out what's going on here. Like, I'll help you this month, but let's come up with a strategy of how next month we can make a little more income for you so this doesn't happen again and again. And just to your point, you're not just sort of outright saying, turning your back and say, don't ask me for anything ever again. You're saying, okay, let's come up with a strategy. What do we need here? There's obviously a problem, keeps happening over and over and over. What do we need here to sort of make sure that we can support you in the best way and make this easier going forward? So I just wanted to make that point, let people be aware that you might be hindering somebody's sort of progress in life. So
I love that so much. It goes into this idea of, pain is not exclusively bad. Pain never feels good. Pain's always
Mhm.
painful and hard.
Mhm.
But, if you look back, and I'm sure you can see this in your own life, but I encourage anybody listening to look at this. Like sometimes the most painful moments of life, those peak events where it was really hard, or maybe you had to figure it out all by yourself and it was really difficult. sometimes those have been the most ripe moments of growth for people and the most opportunity for them to like look at life differently and connect to themselves more deeply. And sometimes pain is like this really valuable thing because it teaches you the most important lessons when you haven't been learning them otherwise. And that was really important for me. I did this exercise, which I encourage everybody to do, where I looked at like 5 or 6 of the hardest times in my life that I would say like, "Whoa, those were really, really hard things." And I actually asked myself a few questions, and I really sat with these questions. You have to sit in them for this exercise to be meaningful. But I sat in them and I looked at, okay, well, even though that was really hard and I've acknowledged how hard it is, what did I learn? And then looked at all the things I learned. And then how did I grow? And looked at all the ways I grew from that really hard experience, or the things I had to adapt or pivot or change, and how those actually grew me in new ways. And then I asked myself, what did I let go of in those experiences that no longer served? And then I asked myself, and not everybody will hit this question and it resonate. But I asked myself after asking those 3 questions, I said, would I rather this experience never happened to me? And every time my answer was no. Though they were not easy experiences, they were really, really hard things. But it was like I became truly grateful, because of course, I'm not taking away from the pain or the suffering that was there, but I became grateful because I realized even though that was so hard, it really grew me in ways that benefited me for all these years to come and changed me in all these ways that I needed. And of course, I did the hard work, which was the part of like I looked to grow and I looked for these things at the time. And sometimes if you haven't come to the other side of them yet, it's because you have to look for what you're supposed to let go of or learn or how you can grow. And you have to really dig in to doing that. But to your point, pain is not exclusively negative. There can be lots of benefits to it. And it doesn't mean it's fun or nice, but there can be a really, important learning side to a lot of it as well.
Yeah, 100%. If you don't sort of realize there's growth and challenge, like, of course, anytime a challenge comes, you're just like, this is terrible. Like, this shouldn't be happening. You're just going to fight with it and create just, so much resistance to it. But I forget who made the quote, but it said, like, you should never wish for a life of ease. Like, you wouldn't want your life to be like easy and perfect all the time. Yeah, it would be comfortable, but it would be very like, you wouldn't grow. You wouldn't see how resilient you are. You wouldn't see how you show up in like, tough situations. Like, there's just so many things that come from those situations that you actually like, you don't want challenge every day, but when challenges come, it's such a good feeling to know like, okay, in the past when this happened, I handled it. Like, I got through it okay, and I was fine. So if this comes again, I got this. Like, you have the confidence. That's what builds confidence, basically. It's like knowing that when a challenge arises, I'll be able to step up to the challenge and come out on top. But if you're always shying away from challenges or just see them as terrible and want to avoid them, you're never going to get that confidence to know that, hey, I can overcome these things. So
I totally agree. I love that. This is a great way to wrap the episode. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. Thank you so much, Mike. And for anybody listening, again, if you do want to check out that course fully for free about rewiring your subconscious mind based on neuroplasticity, I will put the link for free down below. And Mike, thank you so much for being here as always. And if you want to learn more about Mike's social media links are down below as well. Thank you everybody so much for listening, for watching. And again, you can check us out on YouTube if you're watching or if you're listening on Spotify or iTunes, or flipping it over, you can listen to us on your favorite podcast streaming platform if you were watching this as a video. Don't forget to leave your comments down below for future episodes that you want to see us record. We will definitely read through them all and do them. So thank you so much, everybody. We'll see you soon.
thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Share it with friends and family who are on their journey of personal development and growth, and thank you for listening. Next week, we'll be back with more insights to guide you on your journey. And until then, keep practicing our tools and strategies to change your subconscious mind and apply some of the powerful learnings from this podcast so that you experience real life transformation.